Good morning, readers. Well, it's Friday, and today is the release day for He Drowned in Memory, which is book number 11 in the Zachary Goldman series. And if you're reading everything in the Zachary Goldman series and Kenzie Kear's series chronologically, then it falls after Gentle Angel, which is book number 4 in the Kenzie Kear series. So just in case you're trying to figure out the timeline there, that's where it is. There's the cover for He Drowned in Memory, and if you have pre-ordered it, then it should be in your inbox or on your device now. If not, I've got a buy link below and you can snatch it up today. So I'm going to do a short reading from He Drowned in Memory. And I'm actually going to read from chapter 2 this time rather than chapter 1 because we dive directly into the problem. So, background that you have missed in chapter 1, if you're coming directly to chapter 2, is that Zachary has just been released from the hospital where he was staying for his depression and a med change, and he's finally back home again a few weeks after Christmas. Zachary looked around the kitchen, frowning. Kenzie had taken the garlic bread out of the oven, and he had been planning to slice it for her, but when he reached for the place where the butcher block of knives used to sit on the counter, it was no longer there. Ken's? Leaning over the lasagna in the oven to see if it was done, Kenzie turned her head to look back at him. Oh, drawer to your left. Zachary opened the nearest drawer, then realized it was the wrong side, closed it, and opened the next one over. The knives were there. He chose the one he needed for the crusty loaf and closed the drawer. You moved them. He stated the obvious. Was he upset that she had changed something while he was gone? He wasn't sure. It was such a small thing, but it made him feel suddenly awkward, and he found himself looking around the kitchen for anything else that might have changed. Yeah, Kenzie lifted the lasagna pan from the oven and put it onto the stovetop. She turned off the oven. I thought it was best to have them out of sight, so if you're feeling bad. Zachary remembered how he'd put all of the knives in the fridge when he'd been having thoughts of suicide. It had been too difficult having them out on the counter, where he could see them all the time, even from the couch where he sat with his computer. And then later, when things had gotten worse, he had swept them all out of the fridge onto the floor as he wrestled the mental demons who whispered to him that if he just ended his life, he wouldn't have to keep suffering. His cheeks flamed as he thought about it. But Kenzie didn't bring any of that up. She didn't see the need to lecture him on how he should control himself better or not overreact to his emotional state. He'd heard plenty of those lectures before, though not from her. He wasn't sure whether it was because of her medical training or just her personality, that she seemed to understand better than most people. Zachary was silent as he unwrapped the garlic toast and cut it into thick slices. He licked garlic butter off his finger. He could have made his entire meal out of the crusty, warm loaf of garlic bread, which of course Kenzie had known when she'd bought it. Like everyone else, she was determined to fatten him up as quickly as she could. They moved around each other, getting the meal ready. Zachary wanted everything to be perfect, so he stayed focused on what he was doing, concentrating hard on setting the table and putting out the bread and the jug of water, not doing a slapdash job of it and forgetting something vital like forks or plates. In a few minutes they were sitting down together. They dug into the meal, making appreciative noises and enjoying their first chance in weeks to just sit down to a meal together. I should set up a time for us to go visit Mr. Peterson, Zachary suggested. Kenzie nodded. She took a sip of her water. He and Pat would love to see you. So much nicer to visit at their house than at the hospital. There were always distractions in the hospital, too many things that Zachary had to keep an eye on while he was talking to visitors. While he knew he needed to be there, he worried about whether the other patients would disturb his visitors. Someone might have a violent episode while they were there, a psychotic break, and threaten them. It wasn't the best place for an intimate family visit. Mr. Peterson and Patrick Parker were the closest things to parents that Zachary had. Mr. Peterson, Lorne, had been one of Zachary's foster fathers for a few weeks when he'd first gone into foster care at age 10. When Zachary had not been able to stay while Zachary had not been able to stay in the Peterson home for long, he and Mr. Peterson had kept in touch over the years. It was a couple of decades since he and his wife had divorced, and Pat, a somewhat younger man, had become Lorne's partner. They'd been close to Zachary through all the intervening years, becoming his chosen family. I should call Tyrrell. Maybe he'd like to join us too. Kenzie pursed her lips. If you want to. It seemed like an odd response. She'd never been reluctant to have Tyrrell, Zachary's younger brother, join them before. She'd always been the one who had encouraged him to reunite with Tyrrell, and it had been amazing to have one of his biological siblings in his life again. And Tyrrell had introduced him to Heather, and then later to Jocelyn, their two older sisters. I don't think it would be too much, Zachary said. Meeting with a larger group could be overwhelming, especially if one of the members of the group was Jocelyn. Sharp, bitter Joss. But just Tyrrell joining them wouldn't be too hard. Tyrrell was undemanding and easy to get along with. Zachary didn't feel like he had to always be on guard with Tyrrell. Kenzie nodded. If you can get him. Why wouldn't I be able to get him? Kenzie shrugged. She took a couple more bites of lasagna. He hasn't been around the last little while. Hasn't answered any calls. Zachary stopped, his fork in front of his mouth. What? What do you mean? Just that. He hasn't been answering phone calls. But maybe he'll answer you. Do you mean today? He hasn't been answering calls today? No, I mean since Christmas. Zachary frowned. But you've talked to him since then, haven't you? No, we've been concerned, but I've been busy with work and you and other things. I figure that he'll make contact again when he's ready. Until then, best to just leave him to sort things out. Zachary felt like something had exploded in his brain. Tyrrell had stopped communicating? What had happened to him? He'd seemed fine the last time Zachary had seen him. Tyrrell was always cheerful, easygoing, reassuring to Zachary when he got upset or anxious about something. He was the strong one, what Zachary might have been like if it hadn't been for the fire and everything he dealt with, jumping from family to family in foster care. What do you mean, we've been concerned? You and who? Heather. Kenzie poked at the lasagna that remained on her plate, staring down at it instead of looking into Zachary's face. Tyrrell was supposed to go to the hospital with Heather and Joss on Christmas Day, but Tyrrell didn't show up. She tried to get him then, but couldn't get him to call her back. He's not talking to Heather either? Zachary shook his head. Aren't you worried about this? Don't you think it's serious? I told you that we are worried about him, but there is nothing we can do if he doesn't want to talk to us. He's a grown man. He's allowed to decide who he talks to or doesn't. Has anyone gone to see him? Make sure he's okay. Somebody has seen him, right? He's gone incommunicado before. His ex-wife said that he's gone off the rails a few times. He would disappear for days on a drinking binge, not talk to anyone, then come back and act as if nothing had happened, and he couldn't understand why everyone was upset about it. Has she talked to him? What about the kids? Has he talked to Mason or Alicia? No, he was supposed to have them on Christmas Day, but he didn't show up. Don't you think something is wrong? He asked urgently. Maybe. It's getting to the point where I wonder if we want to have the police do a welfare check. But something like that really isn't up to me to do. It should be someone closer to him. His work, friends, neighbors, family. We are family. Zachary pulled his phone out of his pocket and tapped the contact record for Tyrrell. He listened to it ring, hoping that Kenzie would be wrong, and Tyrrell would pick it up, and everything would be fine. Maybe there'd been some misunderstanding. He had had a fight with his ex and hadn't wanted to pick up the kids, then had been too embarrassed to go with Heather and Joss to explain why he didn't have them. And he hadn't wanted to talk to Kenzie because she was an outsider. There could be perfectly logical reasons that they hadn't been able to get a hold of Tyrrell. But he would answer Zachary's call. The call rang through to voicemail. Okay, so there you go. That is a reading from Chapter 2 of He Drowned in Memory, book number 11 in the Zachary Goldman series, available for sale and reading today. So I hope that you'll pick that up. Check out my blog post. I've got some other special deals and some other new releases by other authors that you might be interested in as well. Take a look at those and load up your reading device or to be read pile. And I will talk to you again next week.